Chandra and I will grill you mercilessly, and then we'll open the floor to some questions from the folks, and we'll go from there. So, ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Elizabeth Cluff.
About this path knows how instrumental Dr. Kane has been to me even finishing this. And he's the one that actually suggested that this be my topic. So, you know, if there's anything wrong, take it up with him. I want to thank you guys and my committee. Thank you, Chandra and Sean Hinton, for making the introduction. So this is a heuristic study, meaning it's a self-study. But I just want to say before we get started that my shame is not just my shame, it's generations of shame. Specifically, I'm thinking of people that aren't here today. My father, who died during this process, and my grandmothers on both sides. So I have this little light shining to just keep us present to how much there's a lineage to the shame that many of us experience. It wouldn't be consistent with my research not to have an experiential component. So I really invite you to be in your bodies during this. I have a really powerful image up there, actually drawn by my brother at just the right time, and it just spoke to me. So I'd like to play a piece of music and just ask you to drop down into your body to the extent that you can and that you're willing to. Without stalling enough for your book. I hope to demonstrate how profound it is to expose the self during this presentation. And I guess I'm hoping that people will have some compassion for their own shame and the shame that others feel. Like, I'm really ashamed to just drop that. What should you be ashamed of? Yourself, your needs, your uniqueness, your body, your flaws, your beauty, pleasure, desire, hate. Anything can elicit shame, even our own shame. In looking at definitions and the etymology of the word, I thought this description of shame was probably the best way to get an idea of what shame is. We feel the ground is opening up and that we will disappear into the abyss or wish to. Our mental acuity diminishes, leaving us with the feeling that where there used to be a working mind, there is now a slow-moving ooze paralysis of the intellect. Not just psyche and not just soma, but both at once. As though a hellish flame had located the precise juncture of body self and soul self. Please keep in mind that I'm swimming in the shame waters during this presentation, and this is where some people live. So, definitions. You see shame most often defined as a self-conscious emotion that exists on a continuum. From embarrassment, the blush, which, I felt at the top of the hour, to deep, profound, paralyzing shame like I described in the previous slide. Even amongst psychologists, there's confusion between shame and guilt, and I thought it would be important to make that distinction now. Shame is a belief that you're fundamentally bad, you're irredeemable, you're ruined, there's no hope. And guilt is the belief that, yeah, you did something bad, but there's redemption, there's still hope for you. I think one of the reasons shame is so profound is because it does exist on the level of the body, and that's where we feel it the most powerfully. I think it's important to know that it's a physiological event that's involuntary. Too often I see people blame themselves for even having a shame experience. Psychobiologists have discovered it has a unique physiological print in the body versus other negative and self-conscious emotions. And I think we all know, as that picture, the drawing at the top of the slideshow depicted, what shame looks like. Is it innate or learned? The oldest question probably do exist in psychology. We don't know. Affect theory will tell you that, yeah, it's innate. We have physiological evidence to support that. People from family systems and recovery models, John Bradshaw was really big in the 90s about, toxic shame and healthy shame, and he was really big on, you get it developmentally, and it's passed down through generations. And I just mentioned John Locke here because he wrote, I think it was in the 1700s or late 1600s, about shame. And his hypothesis was that shame was a good alternative to corporal punishment for children. And I still see that in play in schools. I mean, we're talking, come on in. Point is, it's still a problem. Whether it's nature or nurture, I think is less important. This is what we do know. There's argument that shame, there's an adaptive quality to it, that it can be healthy, but we know it's implicated in depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders, personality disorders, suicidal behavior, self-injurious behavior, substance abuse, and criminal recidivism. The shamed person has, because of that lack of hope of redemption, a lot less motivation to not re-engage in criminal behavior. The guilty person feels like there's redemption for me. So, when I told people I was studying shame, like I could just feel the air go out of the room, just life go out of people's faces. A lot of us aren't even aware of our shame, and I think part of it's due to secondary shame. I think of it as the remora on shame, like this thing that's attached to shame. It lives off of shame, and it's always coexisting with shame. We have so much secondary shame in our culture that we don't even want to be around ashamed people, or shameful people, or people who are living in that state of mind. Ultimately, it prevents us from knowing our own shame. Importantly, on a health level, having something show up as a physical symptom, that turns it into a really different issue than, a repercussion of an emotion. If the only way it can come out is through the body, as a sickness. So what did the founding fathers have to say on shame? Most of what I found out was published by post-Jungian and post-Freudians. I don't think shame was part of the vernacular at that time. There was a Victorian cultural thing going on. I don't know that shame would have been considered clinically significant at that point. And neuroscience, as I said earlier, identifies shame as a real thing. That wasn't available back then. So this study, what is and why? As I said earlier, it's a heuristic investigation. And specifically, I looked at assemblage art into whether it would help alleviate shame. Why? As I said, they have deleterious impacts, yet there are insufficient studies on shame. This is a sensitive area because this was my true inspiration for even diving into these really dark places. I noticed these patterns with people I worked with, these very painful, repetitive, entrenched, heartbreaking patterns of self-hatred. It showed up with many of my female clients as excoriation disorder, trichotillomania, things that were so big and so persistent in their psyches. And at that time, I had no really conscious awareness of shame. We worked on mother wounds, we worked on all this archetypal stuff. I offered everything I could. There was no real transformation with some of these areas, attacks on the body self specifically. So that led me to start looking at my own shit, my own shame. Again, I'm studying impacts over causes. There's so many things that can cause shame, trigger shame, but I'm just focusing on 3. Distortions in self-perception, splitting, and perfectionism. Helen Block says this well by writing, shame disrupts ongoing activity as the self-focus is completely on itself, and the result is confusion, inability to think clearly, inability to talk, and inability to act. Sandra Edelman, a Jungian analyst, writes that it prevents that self-assured inquisitiveness, daring originality, and creativity, which we know is required to do our work. This was really interesting for me. I had never thought about this in any detail before this study. And these 3, Sartre, Brusek, and Stolero, all sort of agree that there's something about being experienced or seen as an object or through the objectifying gaze of another that elicits shame. So the responsibility is also put on the person looking at you. How are they looking at you? We can recognize when someone's looking at us with an objective eye versus seeing our true subjectivity in the moment and connecting with us. Splitting. Pretty self-explanatory, but these parts of self get disowned and people are battling with these inner fragments. Jung doubted whether you could achieve a total unity of consciousness, but he was very conflicted on this in the readings. He had a lot of Christian overtones which emphasized wholeness, unity, things of that nature, but he was also really aware of fragmentation and was scared of it. But he did acknowledge a multiplicity of being. Perfectionism. Here it's described as a defense against shame, against experiencing that total inadequacy or failure. Halshed writes this very powerfully in saying that your mind becomes a tyrannical perfectionist, persecuting its weaker feeling self, all the while hiding it as its shameful secret partner, the victim self. I think we've probably figured this out by now. And not everyone understands the shame experience, and I'm really glad that we haven't all felt this. But these accounts are really powerful in understanding what it's like to expose some deep and real part of ourselves, and how that does block creativity. I mean, how could it not? So that brings me to assemblage art. What is it? Well, you're looking at it. This piece I brought in. Oxford Dictionary defines it basically as consisting of found objects. Non-traditional art materials are used as art and to create three-dimensional structures. One of the reasons it's interesting for this is because it is psychological. So surrealism was happening around the time that Freud's work was out there. They acknowledged Freud's stuff, the automatic writing, just this idea that there's another source that's coming through you in your art-making endeavors. Why? Objects relate to projection from the personal unconscious. Why did I choose this? Actually, my friend Justin chose this music box for me, which had no appeal to me and sat on my thing for months. And one day it became of interest. Why? One explanation is it's a projection from my psyche. Something suddenly became interesting. As depth psychologists, we also believe in that there's a collective unconscious. Maybe there was a dialogue going on between my conscious I, my personal and unconscious, these objects, and how they relate to the collective. There's a mysterious process that happens, but what I do know is that dialogue is happening between these different aspects of self. An important thing about making sculpture is really the making of a body. You know, making this new composite thing that exists in the world out of disparate parts. And you can look at a table at the beginning of an assemblage project and you just see shit, you see junk, you're just like, it's very daunting, you know, to look at all these unrelated things and somehow you're gonna form something out of that, something maybe even beautiful. If I had time, I would go deeper into what incarnation means, especially in our Judeo-Christian culture. But it takes bravery, courage to incarnate your ideas and put them out in the world. And this is a part self for me. This feels like a piece of my gut or my soul is plopped down right in front for everyone to see. It's literally retrieving the lost parts of self. I'll let you guys read this, but I said Jung was kind of focused on wholeness and unity as a sign of like mental health and well-being. And Hillman, archetypal psychologist Hillman, didn't necessarily agree with that. He felt that we should amplify our multiplicity on some level. And it wasn't pathological to have disparate parts. And that if we do amplify them, we can become more conscious of them. And I feel like that's an important part of assemblage. It's really making those disparate parts of self conscious. And being able to physically observe something. To see your own self in an object outside yourself is sometimes the only way to know what's in there. Another powerful image drawn by my brother. It really embodies what it's like when you're in the research process and it's like breathing mud. It's like you can't see anything besides what is right in front of your eyes, and you're just moving forward on faith. I'm not going to read this, but it basically follows like this method of inquiry that was created by Moustakis, and I'll just briefly go over the stages that I went through. Initial engagement with the topic, these drawings, these ladies kept appearing like when I was doodling in class, which not all teachers realize is like a good thing. It means you're smarter too. So I just got really curious, and in archetypal psychology, especially studying like the god Dionysus, and this, Pacifica is big on embodying and ritual and symbol. So I started to seek out like actual symbols in the world. Like maybe if I wear the hat, I'll be able to channel this energy and understand what it's about. So I started collecting the wardrobe. That, dealing with that era and that look and identity, led me to burlesque. I was very preoccupied by the archetypal Dionysus and what that meant for identity. He's the god of women, the god of madness, the god of frenzy. And these kind of Victorian themes I was seeing did relate somehow to these burlesque dancers and these burlesque costumes. And it was sort of a reaction or a compensation I felt for the restrictions that women experienced. I lived this for a year. I came up with my own persona. I had my theme song all picked out. These are actually my wigs, and they're not all of them. Anyone who knows me has probably seen me in one of them. But it didn't lead me anywhere. I could not metabolize this into something that I could feed back in any kind of articulate way. So I dropped it, and I fell into a long fallow period. And during that period also, I lost my father. I felt I knew I had to live out this multiplicity and these questions. I just didn't know how. And at this point, shame was still not on my radar. So I kind of mushed these sections together. Emergent, incubation, explication. This was just a lot of digging and experimenting and exploring. My friend Chris drew that. That's supposed to be me, but I think I look like I'm 80, and that's GGB. It's hilarious, but it speaks to this notion, right? That this traces back. We have ancestry with this. So back to assemblage and the use of objects. Kandinsky wrote that everything that's dead quivers. Everything has a secret soul that is silent more often than it speaks. I spoke a little bit about the subjectivity of objects, and the reason that I brought this piece in is because it was the first time I actually experienced a dialogue with the things that I was working with. I'm sure it's because they were little people figures that came quite naturally, and what I'd made before was more mechanical, whimsical, no particular meaning. But this actually, especially this like ballerina in front of this distorted mirror, something about it just spoke to all those themes. I mean, it's quite literal how she's looking in this distorted reflection of herself, and she's frozen, paralyzed. She's an object. Then I got her a friend, and the rest is history. So to validate all this stuff, I hoped I would do that through an assemblage workshop. Hello!
We've got one over here.
Couples are being all split up.
We're going to assemble you later.
Perfect timing. So I was so excited about what I could get through assemblage art that I wanted to do a workshop and see, like, are other people going to get anything out of this? I really was never wanting to do a self-study. I wanted to look out there. I wanted to do the dancers. I wanted to do that, and it was his fault. But I ended up looking at myself. But it comes back around. So I looked, I had questionnaires. I tried to make like a safe setting to create within. I wanted it to be really embodied, but what I found was that just the activity itself was kind of disembodying. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. Just some pictures. See, I actually did it. See? That's proof. I wish I had time to talk about this woman. Her personal journey was probably the most profound of all the participants. She had had this cross for 57 years. She grew up with that cross on her wall in a very devout Catholic family. And she really used this opportunity to work with her own shame and creative expression. Hi! These are other chairs. Here, you can have mine. I'm not using it. Oh, wait, you might. I can sit on the ground. Is that okay?
Yeah, right.
I'm close. It was just really touching and moving that if 1 out of 8 people have a profound experience from workshop, I think that's good. She's still working, and the reason I have this picture here is because I invited her to participate in an art show that I was having as part of my own shame journey, and she did. And she actually brought her husband, who was the source of some of her shame historically. She had shared things with him in the past, her creative projects that were darker or not aspects of her that he felt he knew or liked. So to have them both there and have him support her in that way was really special. And she's gone on to do more shows. I'm not taking credit for it, I'm just saying. So, varying awareness of shame, I think we all have that. There's inconsistency with how the questions were answered. We're not all aware of our shame, so we're not going to have a consistent response about how it exists for us. Everyone that was in the workshop had some degree of creative expression already. In the post-workshop questionnaires, as you can see, some level of shame was triggered. We saw there's a continuum of that, from embarrassment to profound shame. And there's definitely negative evaluation of one's own creative expression. Themes from the workshop: perfectionism, critical self-talk, fear of mistakes, fear of the unknown. I'm gonna ruin it, I don't know what I'm doing. It's not good. Unembodiment. Again, as much as I wanted it to be embodying shame, it just didn't work out that way. It's not that type of activity. Permission was a really big theme. An example of that was one of the participants got there early, and she's like, "Oh, I wish I had some paper," so I handed her a book. I'm like, "Here, take some pages out of this book," and she's like, "You can't take pages out of a book. The book is here for you to create with." And there was really this threshold crossing where I invited her to rip a page out of the book, and I did it first. And I'm like, "Look." Shh. And she just got so excited about crossing that barrier and being able to transform something and not feel that she had made a sin or ruined something. And this piece that's behind it, you can't really see. Just quickly to say that on that permission note, that I hated what I made when I did my assemblage work. I fucking hated it. It was just just sad and just lame and an embarrassment, something to be ashamed of. It wasn't until this assemblage artist said to me, "This is really good, and if you want it to be in my show, I invite you to be in my show." And that's something that I'm proud of. I like to think that I validate myself and my own work, but it's just so telling of how someone gives you permission. I had permission now to like what I did. I don't think I would be able to have this here in front of you if that moment hadn't happened. I actually like that. I'm bummed I sold it. I'm borrowing it for the day. Conclusions. There were sampling issues. I put ads out on Facebook. I didn't have a ton of people. There were flaws in research design. There's no way I was going to have any results similar within a few days workshop that I had over 2 years of grappling with my own deep shame. And it's inconclusive. I would need to follow up and do some kind of longitudinal study to really see if it made an impact. In my heuristic study, I found that in shame response to indirect confrontation, a lot of shame treatments in the past have been about outing yourself, I'm a shamed person, I'm Deborah and I'm shamed, and just really bringing out hiding in that way, which has a lot of potential to re-shame. or perform that act without having any inner transformation. Implications are shame sensitivity. I mean, I think that's very true for therapists. Therapy has a huge potential to re-shame people if you're not aware of that shame is in the room. And self-study, like, if you're in this work, especially with other people, like, be willing to go down that road of inquiry. Is that there for me? It doesn't have to be. I don't think everyone has this shame issue. I just know that's really common. So really this conclusion is the beginning, I feel. It's really the first time I've been done with something and not felt done at all. It's really annoying. You know, since the conclusion of this study, it really puts it into context of how much bigger life is in this one particular study. Like, this was just scratching the surface of what it is to deeply engage with this material. You know, the stuff I've done since this study, I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't done this. Like, now I would write a dissertation about touch, because I've been studying touch, therapeutic touch. It allowed me to return to the body, which that embodiment wasn't possible for me before I did this study. I had to go by way of assemblage art. I had to create these inanimate bodies that I could relate to before I could tolerate being with my own self. And now I have so much more freedom. You know, I'm not, everyone that knows me in here knows I have this horrible crippling shame. I couldn't like dance in front of anyone. I went to like a dance thing with my friend here, and I just like wanted to sit in the corner and cry the entire time, and actually did do that with another friend. I kept forcing the body on myself as a way to shame, and it was too much. The fire was just too hot. So going this circuitous route with the wigs and the art really did kind of gently push me forward into being able to really be embodied. I think I draw my paper for how I was going to conclude. Oh well. There it is. So, the end is just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's a reason we all gathered here today to celebrate this, so thank you.
Skin shame.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask Chandra, since you're here on Skype, if you have a question or two you would like to ask at this point.
I do. I have several. And I'm echoing.
You only get one question.
Nice try. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not. So first, Deborah, really just want to appreciate you and the journey. And certainly as a member of your committee, just acknowledge your responsiveness and the rigor that you brought to the work, as well as, of course, the depth of your intuition. So I just want to applaud you for everything that you've put into this. And as you said, it's a beginning, but what a wonderful way to set off. So just really appreciating you.
Thank you.
I want to start with a question that speaks to some of what you addressed relative to how you put it, I think, as the incarnation process. And I was reminded of the ways in which ritual symbols and ceremony can somewhat perhaps reflect the assemblage art process. We see our own self outside of ourselves in and through ritual. And I'm wondering if you might offer some comments on that, given I think you also mentioned the ways in which the body and the process of ceremony can be important in some of this. And then as corollary to that, what might be some other therapies that you can see as perhaps analogous to or supplemental to assemblage art that would actually help develop one's connection to the somatic self in order to move into the healing work?
Well, I had a really exciting moment with clay a couple weeks ago, where just sitting at a table with a lump of clay, and a face incarnated in my hands, if you will. I don't, assemblage art is just what I picked, and it happened to fit very neatly with representing the disparate self, the fragmented self, and reassembling it. But I think you could use any form of art to do this. Dance, painting. In terms of ceremony, I can't really comment on that because I just don't have any experience with that aspect of it. In terms of a ritual, there is a ritual aspect to preparing yourself to meet with the psyche, I guess. Like cleaning up my space, getting myself clear. But it's not a strong component of what I did. I just stayed kind of open and fluid, and it just came through me.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the connection between hate and shame.
Hate in general?
You were saying that at one point you were reflecting on your own work and you were very strong in your hatefulness of it.
Right.
I'm wondering if you have any deeper reflections on the relationship between hate and shame.
Definitely, there's a lot to say about that. I think with deep, profound shame, you do find self-hatred at the core, and hatred of this ruined self. So what I create, I hate. I could be a mother who had a child. If I hate myself and I look at that child, part of me hates that child. So I think in cases of profound shame, shame that's really affecting the bedrock of who someone is, yeah, there's a lot of hate, and a lot of it's directed at the self. Typically women direct it back at self, and then men you see like in the criminal justice system. But yeah, I think self-hate is more powerful than hate going out into the world externalized.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering if you're familiar with epigenetics?
Yeah, a bit. I started playing with that, and then I realized that I could get like overly excited and really distract myself. But in terms of passing down, through epigenetics, trauma history, that transgenerational transmission, what they revealed about epigenetics, I think that the shame trauma tie is really strong. Yeah. And where you find one, you probably find the other. And I didn't look at trauma because the causes, that's a different dissertation. That's a life's work. But I only know, as far as what's been published recently on epigenetics.
Yeah, well, certainly that mentioning of yours is where I was going, and it might be interesting for future to see how and if that weaves in for you. Just two other quick questions. One, in your experience, given the work that you've done, how would you talk about time, the allowance of time relative to the healing process, and whether or not you feel that in regard to shame, time is a liberator or something that actually produces much more embodied entrenchment?
I think there's a couple of different ways to look at that. Nothing could have sped up my process, but having limits I think are good. There's a common phrase like wallowing in shame. I think without limits it could be easy just to believe and buy into your own shame story. Daniela Steve, I believe her last name is, I went to a conference, a Marion Woodman conference, she talked about how we create trauma worlds when we've had trauma. And I think it's similar. You can create a shame world that you could live in indefinitely. That piece I created that I hated, I had 3 days to complete something, which triggered all kinds of shame about potential failure and all that good stuff. So I do think it's a long-term process when you've got shame at the core of your being. I don't think a 3-day workshop is going to completely transform that. I wish. If I believe that, I might be like a really good businesswoman selling that. Transform your shame in 3 days.
Yeah.
In Nicaragua. While you do yoga.
Absolutely. My final question has to do with how you think men and women can support one another in and through the healing process. You mentioned some of the differences between women's experiencings of shame and men's. And I'm wondering if you might have any suggestions about how men and women can work together to help facilitate something that helps them move beyond shame.
Right. It's interesting because I have that does go on in my life with my men that are close to me, family and friends. I think that you have to have certain softness towards your own shame first and foremost, and going to that soft place inside of you that can really be compassionate towards that pain. And then you connect with anyone on that level, any gender. And I think if you start there, and then you get into the specifics of what your shame story is, I mean, gender aside, is creating a safe space. And I think as women, you know, and the men are acculturated to be strong and independent and da-da-da, we feed into that sometimes, which can shame men. So I think in a way, because we are more close to our feelings, stereotypically, creating a safe space for men to step into and admit that they feel ashamed and vulnerable would be important.
Great. Thank you so much for those responses.
Thank you for the questions.
Okay, we have a question from our internal reader, Dr. Lori Pye, and she asks, what most deepened your understanding of depth psychology and of yourself in this dissertation process? In 25 words or less.
Deepen my understanding of depth psychology. What is depth psychology? I mean, start there. I mean, in terms of like the standard stuff that we deal with in depth psychology, like let's say I shared about transference dialogues and this dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. That doing artwork really made that real for me. Because I look at this and I almost have like an objective, I'm able to be objective about it. This is not just me. Like I actually asked these things what they wanted to be. And it sounds a little mad, but not in the field of depth psychology.
Yeah.
Like I would sit there and be like, do you want to face this way in the mirror or that way? And I would do this stuff in my head. So in terms of that whole connecting with the collective psyche and how creativity is thought about in our field, I think, yeah, the transference dialogue would be one of the deeper experiences or something that made it more real.
Okay, cool. So going back to guilt and shame, one of the definitions I like best is that guilt is about something you've done or failed to do. Shame is about something that you are.
Right.
So my question would be, does shame ever go away?
You know, if I hadn't lost my papers, I think you're sitting over there. I was going to finish up by saying that, just that it can move. What I know now is it can be something that absolutely paralyzes you. God, it's so funny to look around the room and see how many people in my life have been in my presence when I've been paralyzed by shame. I'm in contact. I'm in a relationship now with shame. Like shame like hangs out with me and it's there. It's just not debilitating. It doesn't grip me on that animal, primitive, fetal position, can't think, ooze paralysis. I'm sure something could bring me there.
Right.
But so there is healing. But I think if you have the goal of eradicating shame, that's a really lofty goal, and you probably fail and re-shame yourself.
Yeah. It's like a trick. I think that one's rigged.
Right.
So what about the Judeo-Christian idea of original sin and shame?
Right. I wrote a little bit about that in my paper. And Freud and Jung alluded to that being the shame source. You know, the upright gait, the exposed genitals, the defying God's will, eating the apple, Right? They weren't ashamed before that whore Eve, ate the apple. Right?
Yep.
So there's that.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
That in itself is the shame, a shame source.
Super. Okay, let's ask the folks in the audience if anybody has a question or a comment they would like to make. Help her out, or she'll be worried about she didn't do something right.
Dan?
So would you say that your cognitive understanding of shame is what makes you comfortable with your own shame, or have you actually just created a sort of mystical space between you and shame where you don't need to cognitively build yourself, you just are comfortable?
I think it's both. I think, there's no way.
Can you repeat the question, please?
I don't think I can.
He's asking if it's my cognitive understanding of shame that helps me live with it, or a mystical space that I create.
Just you've
Right.
explored it and it's
So yeah, it's not that mysterious. Having the cognitive understanding helped me a lot to move away from blaming myself for feeling that way. Like, the secondary shame was really strong because I was ashamed of being ashamed. So when I realized, like, oh, there's physiology behind this. This is not voluntary. I'm not choosing this. That freed me up a lot in my mental constructs about what shame was. So allowing me to look at it from that perspective was like, okay, I can kind of step away from the emotional power of what it is, but living it, like putting myself in shaming environments on purpose. Like, there's no, I think people that wrote the books could be riddled with shame and like unable to stand here and talk, because it doesn't matter how much you know about shame, it doesn't change that primitive body level experience of it. I think you have to have moments of like surviving it that are digestible. So, both. That's the specific answer. Both.
Okay. Anybody else? We got time for one more. Yes.
So how are you planning, or what do you think touch, or how can touch help address the physiology of shame, the body of shame?
Right. So, yeah, probably one of the most profound experiences I had with shame was after the study was concluded. I went to a workshop on neuroaffective touch, and you look around the room and like, who do you want to be partners with? And you're gonna be partnered up. And there's one woman who she's just a kind of unattractive person. I was like, I don't want to be her partner. I know that. I'll be partners with anyone else. So of course she ends up being my partner. And she's annoying, she's not attractive, but she needed to be touched in a non-sexual, non-agenda laden way she had this deep, like, childhood need just to be held. And I got to be that with her. And she let, like, her shame of not being lovable, like, everything I thought about her, she thought about herself, right? Like, not attractive, not touchable. She's one of those people that's not touchable. And that's her belief system about herself. So the touch part has huge implication. You don't have to say the word shame. You hold someone in a certain way, and if there's shame there, it has the opportunity to safely come out. And that was really special. Like, I felt blessed almost to share that with her and look in her eyes and have her say, my mother would never hold my gaze. Thank you for not looking away. So that's actually what I'm excited about doing more of now, is using the touch and not having to be so explicit about shame.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you for not looking away from yourself. I'm going to take our committee outside for a moment. We are going to meet and be right back. So you can ask her more questions if you want. Can I use the bathroom?